All right, today we're going to tackle a text that's part family tree, part ancient geopolitical map, and, honestly, part mystery. We're talking about Genesis chapter 10, often called the Table of Nations. Now, on the surface, it looks like just a long list of really strange names, but if you dig just a little deeper, you find this incredible blueprint for the ancient world. It was their attempt to explain, well, everything, from the rise of empires to the diversity of all humankind after a massive, world-altering flood. So, let's get into it.
So the question that Genesis 10 is trying to answer is huge. I mean, think about it. After a global flood basically wipes the slate clean, how does humanity even restart? How do you go from a single family on an ark to, the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Babylonians? How do you explain this whole complex tapestry of different nations and cultures? Well, this chapter tries to lay out the original roadmap.
And the answer begins with just three brothers, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Noah's sons. Now, according to the text, these three guys are the ancestors of every single person on Earth. So their family tree isn't just a list of relatives, it's a political and geographical map of the known world at the time. Let's trace these three foundational bloodlines, and we'll start with Japheth.
First up is Japheth. The best way to think about his descendants is as the explorers, the seafarers. They're consistently linked with all the coastal regions and the faraway lands to the north and west of the biblical world. Basically, the edges of the map, so to speak.
Here are his 7 sons. And look, these aren't just random names. For the ancient reader, they were placeholders for entire peoples. Medai, for example, meant the Medes over in Persia. Javan was the name for the Ionian Greeks. It's kind of like an ancient Rolodex of all the nations scattered across the Mediterranean and what we now call Turkey.
And the map gets even more detailed when we get to the grandsons. You see names like Tarshish, which might refer to a super distant port way out in Spain, and Kittim, which is Cyprus. These names would have brought to mind powerful maritime traders and faraway commercial hubs. It really paints a picture of a world connected by sea routes, with Japheth's kids as the masters of the waves.
This verse right here perfectly sums up the whole destiny of Japheth's descendants. They're the people of the isles, or what you could call the coastlands. They spread out, and each group gets its own language and its own territory. It's a really clear picture of this outward force, humanity expanding, diversifying, and sailing across the sea.
Okay, now let's turn to the second son, Ham. If Japheth's family represents expansion, Ham's line is all about consolidation and power. These are the builders, the founders of the great ancient empires and city-states that would eventually come to dominate the world stage.
And Ham's sons are absolute heavyweights of the ancient world. Cush is the kingdom of Nubia, just south of Egypt. Mizraim is actually the Hebrew name for Egypt itself, the first real superpower. Phut is often linked with Libya. And then there's Canaan, which is, of course, that strategically vital piece of land that becomes the focus of so much of the rest of the biblical story. These are the peoples who will become both neighbors and, adversaries to ancient Israel.
But inside Ham's family tree, one man gets some serious special attention, Nimrod. The text describes him as the world's first mighty one, sort of a proto-emperor. That phrase, a mighty hunter before the Lord, is a little ambiguous. It could mean he was a great hero, or it could be a hint that this was a guy whose ambition was so big it was a challenge to heaven itself.
And Nimrod wasn't just some warrior. He was a founder of civilizations. His kingdom kicked off in the land of Shinar. That's Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. And just look at the cities he's credited with founding: Erech, Akkad, and most famously Babel, the site of that infamous tower. This is the birth of urban centralized power.
And the urban explosion just keeps going. From this same region, the text says, a figure named Asher went out and built Nineveh. Now that is a huge name drop. Nineveh would later become the capital of the incredibly powerful and frankly brutal Assyrian Empire. The legacy of Ham's line is one of empire building, literally written in stone and mortar.
Then we also get Canaan's descendants, this whole collection of Ite peoples, the Jebusites, the Amorites, and so on. Now, this isn't just a boring list. It's actually a political claim. The text is very carefully listing out the exact peoples who are living in the land that will later be promised to the descendants of Abraham. It's setting the stage for the central conflict of the next several books of the Bible.
And that brings us to our final brother, Shem. The text gives him a special status, tracing his line with the most detail. So why? Well, because this is the lineage that the authors are most interested in. This is the line that will eventually lead to Abraham and the nation of Israel.
Shem's sons are identified with the great nations of the Fertile Crescent. Elam is over in modern-day Iran, Ashur is Assyria, and Aram represents the Arameans of Syria. This is the heartland of the Semitic-speaking peoples, and in fact, the word Semitic comes directly from the name Shem.
But right here, the narrative lens zooms in, like dramatically. It stops following all the different branches and instead focuses on one specific lineage, from Arphaxad down to Shelah, and then to this key figure named Eber. And it's from his name that we almost certainly get the word Hebrew. The universal story is starting to narrow its focus to one particular people.
Eber's two sons represent a really crucial fork in the road. One son, Joktan, has tons of descendants who go on to populate the Arabian Peninsula, but the story decides to follow his brother, Peleg, whose name contains this really cryptic hint about a massive event that literally shook the world.
So Peleg's name literally means division, and the text tells us it's because in his days the earth was divided. What could that possibly mean? Well, some have speculated that it's a distant memory of a geological cataclysm, like continents drifting apart. But most scholars see it as direct foreshadowing for the event in the very next chapter, the scattering of peoples and the division of languages at the Tower of Babel. The story is planting a major clue for us right here.
Okay, so let's zoom back out for a second. What we've just walked through isn't just some dry list of ancestors. When you actually piece it all together, Genesis 10 is a comprehensive, structured map of the world as the ancient Israelites understood it.
This chart really lays it all out. You've got Japheth's descendants, the seafaring peoples of the north and west. You have Ham's descendants, the builders of the great empires in Africa and Mesopotamia, plus the inhabitants of Canaan. And finally, Shem's descendants, the peoples of the Near East from whom that chosen line is going to emerge. It's a complete, ordered vision of their world.
And the chapter ends by basically stating its purpose outright. This is how the nations were divided in the earth after the flood. It's a statement of complete knowledge, an attempt to create a kind of unified field theory of where everyone comes from, all tracing back to the three sons of Noah.
So why does this ancient list even matter to us? Because it was so much more than a family tree. For the ancient world, this was a map of identity. It told you who you were related to, who your traditional enemies were, and why certain nations lived in certain territories. It was a foundational document for understanding geopolitics, culture, and your own place in the world. Which, leaves us with a final question. The ancient Israelites used this genealogical map to make sense of their very complex world. So, what about us? What are the stories we tell ourselves today to explain who we are? What are our modern tables of nations, whether they're based on genetics or politics or culture, that help us navigate our own complex world and understand our connections to one another?